Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Well, let's talk about our presenter. Tandra Malcom is the operations manager for the San Juan County Communications Authority, which handles police, fire, and EMS calls for the city of Farmington, Aztec, and Bloomfield, as well as San Juan County, New Mexico. She began her career in 1994 as a dispatcher, working a console, and worked her way up through the department to operations manager in 2006. She's an active member of the New Mexico chapters of APCO and NENA and serves on both boards. She never says that won't happen here because she now knows that anything is possible and we must be prepared. So Tandra, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me this opportunity. So December 7th, 2017, Aztec High School in Aztec, New Mexico experienced every student, parents, schools, and public safety's worst nightmare. So for today's webinar, we're going to understand the incident, the pre-planning that went into the incident, lessons that were learned from the incident, and what we're doing moving forward after the incident to continue to train and progress. So one of the first questions a lot of people will ask is, where is Aztec, New Mexico? Aztec, New Mexico is a rural community. We're located in the northwest corner of New Mexico in what is commonly referred to as the Four Corners.
Okay. Tandra, let's do a quick survey and let's find out, have your dispatchers ever trained with your agency during an active shooter drill? Okay. Getting some answers. Most of them. Looks like about 66% say no. A little bit more than that, 31% say yes. Wow. Okay.
All right. Okay, we ready to move on? All right. So training with your agencies is extremely important, and as we go through this, you'll understand how it helped us in how we handled the situation and how our agencies handled our situation that day. We call this the shooting you may not have heard of because a lot of people didn't hear about the Aztec High School shooting. The reason that we didn't is because our agencies made a conscious choice to not give our shooter any notoriety. They didn't want him to gain any publicity from what he had done. So on December 7th, William Atchison, he was 21 years old, walked into Aztec High School at 8:04 a.m., dressed as one of the students that was headed to class. He had already been investigated and interviewed prior to December 7th by both the FBI and the Aztec Police Department in reference to comments he had made in an ongoing or an online gaming network about planning a mass shooting. The comment was, if you're going to commit a mass shooting, does anyone know about cheap assault rifles? The case was closed. Nobody thought anything about it. Afterwards, we found out the shooter had been planning this event for quite some time. He had multiple pictures of the high school and a step-by-step plan lined out that we found later during the investigation. So the night before, on December 6th, the shooter went to work as planned. He worked at a convenience store gas station here located in Aztec. He was the clerk there. The next morning, on December 7th, he got off work. He went home. He went to his room. This is where his parents thought he stayed until they were later contacted by law enforcement after the shooting. The shooter entered the school before the bell rang. He hid in a restroom until students were in the classrooms. At this time, he was gearing up to carry out his plan. What they found out later was that the male student who was shot first, before going to class, decided he needed to go into the restroom. When he walked in, the shooter was preparing to come out and start shooting. So as he walked in, he was the first victim, and he was shot immediately. There was a custodian in the hallway who heard the shots. He tried to warn the female student who was still standing in the hallway, but by that point it was too late. The shooter had come out of the bathroom, and he also shot the female. As the shooter walked out, the custodian was able to communicate to the school secretary via a handheld radio to call 911 for an active shooter and to lock the school down. The secretary immediately locked the school down and as she called 911. When she was talking to our call taker, you can actually hear shots being fired in the background every time the custodian would key up. The shooter was running down the hallway firing shots into multiple classrooms. The custodian remained in the area following the shooter and updating the secretary about where he was and what was going on. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is a layout of our communications center. If you'll click one more time, it'll show an arrow labeled 1. The arrow 1 is our supervisor, and he was hanging over from our graveyard shift for a 4-hour shift in addition to his 8 that he had already worked. He's the one who took the call from the secretary. I had walked by him and I heard him say, "You hear shots?" We're a rural community, so I didn't think a lot about it. We have a lot of shots heard during hunting seasons, and this being December, we were in the middle of one, so I didn't think a lot about it. Arrow 2 is our on-duty floor supervisor for day shift. She's trying to sign a trainee off that day on Farmington Police radio. At the point that she realized what had happened, she walked to the middle of the room, looked into my office and said, "Are you direct? We have a school shooting." Arrow 3 is the operations manager, my office. One thing about it, I've maintained all of my certifications, and I'm familiar with our phone and CAD systems. I think that's extremely important for administrators who move up from the radio to maintain their certifications and keep familiar with all of their equipment in their center. I was able to grab my headset, and I headed to the floor. The biggest reason was because I knew we didn't have a call taker at that point yet for the day. Arrow 4 is a day shift dispatcher working the Aztec Bloomfield Police Channel. Arrow 5 is our grave shift dispatcher who is also hanging over to work 4 hours of overtime. She was on the Sheriff's Office channel. Arrow 6 is a day shift dispatcher working Fire EMS channel. And Arrow 7 was our trainee trying to get signed off on the Farmington Police channel. We didn't have call takers on duty yet. Our call takers at this time were coming in at 9 a.m. and it was only 8. So I signed in to the position directly behind Arrow 1 and was able to take calls from that position. As soon as the call came in, our dispatchers immediately sent units to the scene. The first units were on scene with the shooter within 3 minutes. We're a combined dispatch center with the ability to send multiple jurisdictional responses from all of our surrounding agencies. So all of the other dispatchers notified their supervisors immediately that we had a shooting in Aztec. And Aztec had 4 officers. They had their chief, their captain, their lieutenant, and their school resource. And within a matter of 20 minutes, we had over 100 officers at the school from the other surrounding agencies. The agencies all start out on their own channels, but as they get on scene, they do go to one channel. We use the Sheriff's Office channel for this incident. With the exception of the units inside, we're all on the Aztec channel. We did have one incident during this that we found a lesson learned pretty early on, and that is whenever I first trained, we trained that dispatch was always in charge of the radios. And what we discovered this day was that we didn't really take control of one of our radios, And so while the units were inside doing a search for the shooter, the other units coming on scene decided that they needed to go in, but they weren't talking to each other. So that's an area that we learned that we need to take control of the radio and be able to tell our officers, you can't go in, you can't do this yet, let us get a hold of them or go to this radio. That's been a valuable lesson on our end that we have taken from this incident. So the subject was in the school. Law enforcement officers arrived. The school was on lockdown. This meant all the doors were locked. The officers couldn't make any entry. So the first unit on scene had to shoot out a window to gain entry into the school. After he shot out that window, they only heard one following shot, and they do believe that's when our shooter took his own life. The units began searching the school for additional potential shooters. The units outside set up a command post, perimeters, and they were getting prepared for any further activity. They put together some teams to do sweeps of the buildings for primary and secondary searches. They had to decide what they were going to do with the students that were there. So they went into the gym. They prepared it as an initial location for evacuation. Once they determined that they only had one shooter and that he was no longer a threat, they started evacuating students into the gym. The students were not allowed to take any bags with them as they were evacuated into the gym, and they were searched as they entered because the officers needed to make sure we didn't have any additional shooters. The students, these are high school students, they were all surrounded by heavily armed officers. Something that we think about a lot at this point is that a lot of our responders had children in this school, and they didn't know if it was their children or other children that had been shot. They just knew they had a job to do. But it made it a lot tenser because they also had students in this school. So what happens in the center? I've gone to a lot of active shooter trainings, and that's always the question because it's always done from the perspective of field units. So what happens in here? We had dispatchers who had just gotten off duty at 7 a.m., and they heard this go out over scanners. Being dispatchers, they listened to everything. And we had a couple of them just turn around after working all night, barely getting home, and they came right back into work without even being called. Others we called to see if they could come in. We had others who called us to say, what do you need? By 9:30, we had 2 complete shifts, and every dispatch position and call taker position on our floor was full, and we have 17 positions that we can use. We had the complete next shift in by 9:30, and we put them, we had all the call takers full, but we put the next shift behind the dispatchers working the incident, plugged in where they could hear everything, because we wanted them to be able to take over the incident. So we sat them that way for about 45 minutes is how they sat directly behind the dispatchers working the incident. By 10:30, we had the entire shift that was on during the incident was off of the radios, and the new swing shift people were already on the radios. We allowed the day shift people to go to the back parking lot. They were debriefed. They got to discuss what went right, what went wrong, and they were offered the opportunity to leave for the day or stay. 5 of our 6 people on the dispatch floor left. The day shift supervisor chose to stay, and she finished out what ended up being a 12-hour workday for her. Inside of our communication center, the office directly to the left of my office is our conference room. We've also turned it into a tactical operations center, is what we call it. The reason we did that is because we realized that for us to open our EOC, our Emergency Operations Center, takes a couple of hours because it's not always set up. It's just a small area. We have to actually go in and move furniture, plug things in. So we built our conference room out into a tactical operations center, and we brought in emergency management. We brought in a captain from the county fire department. We brought in our PIOs, and they were all able to sit in that room with a tactical dispatcher. They had CAD, they had news, radios, so we could hear everything, but that allowed them to kind of control what was happening at the scene and what the scene needed instead of the dispatchers having to take care of it. After about 10:30, the TOC took care of it. And that's always part of our unified command, is the TOC, so that we have someone in there who can call and get whatever they need from the scene, freeing the dispatchers up, because we all know that emergencies in the rest of our county did not stop just because we had a school shooting. Next slide, please. So training and awareness, preparing for this incident is huge. And we have another question here.
That was the one we asked about, if they did they trained with their agency.
Oh, okay. Yep, we did. Sorry about that. So our agency, we do a lot of tabletops. Tabletops, if you haven't ever done one, that's where you go in, you get all the players. So you get 911, your police, your fire, your EMS. You get the schools. In our incident, we did schools. Excuse me. And you sit everybody down at the table, and you have a scenario. And you go through the scenario, and what it allows is for the school to find out what's going to happen. If they have an incident at the school, when they call 911, what's going to happen? One of the things we found in our first tabletops was that the schools actually had policies as to who could call 911. And that was one of the first things that we did away with, because we wanted them to allow anybody to call 911 in an emergency. We didn't want them to say only the superintendent or only the principal, because you need to allow anybody who has access to a phone to call to get help. So we began doing tabletops with our schools about 12 and a half, 13 years ago on what to expect. And we started with, they would make the 911 call, and then I would talk about what happens, what are we going to do when you call 911? And I start out with, we're going to ask this series of questions. And we explain to them why we ask the questions, because a lot of people, as you know, think our questions are silly. They don't need to answer them, just get someone here. So we explain why we're asking all the questions, how important it is for them to answer our questions so that we make sure to get the right people to them. Then the police, the fire, and the EMS go over what happens when they get on scene. One of the things that we found is, because teachers are caregivers and their instinct is to protect, so that was something that we had to explain to them, was if we have a student down who's injured, but we still have shooting going on, what's going to happen? And it took them quite a few sessions to understand why we had to step over that student to go to the shooter without helping that student, because that wasn't ever in their thought process. So that was how we introduced active shooter to our schools and what would happen in it. So we got very fortunate in that the Aztec superintendent, he took our tabletop and our drills to heart. And he saved lives that day, because he actually took it a step further, and he started training his staff on what to do, on how to lock down, on how to protect your students, on what everything meant and how things were going to happen. He does annual drills, and they include dispatch. So when they're doing an annual drill, they start with everything from, this is what dispatch is going to do, so we talk to them, and again, we go through it with their staff. So we participate heavily with our schools as well. Okay, next slide. So here in San Juan County, we train heavily with all of our agencies. So these are just some pictures of us doing some different trainings with them. We do multi-jurisdictional drills where all of our departments get together so that all of our departments know each other, they know how each other works. We have tactical dispatchers. They go out and they work with them. The top left is our former training coordinator, and she was out doing tactical. And then the rest of them are just from different drills. So they're multi-agency. That's probably all members of all 4 of our police departments that we have here. We also previously dispatched for state police here in the state of New Mexico up in our area, and they participate in our drills as well, so that when our agencies all get together, they all know what's going to happen. Okay. The other thing this allows is because we have different agencies who are in different areas, it allows our sheriff's office to go train in Farmington schools or in the mall. It allows Aztec to come train in the county schools, or the county in Farmington to go train in the Aztec schools, allowing the officers and the field responders to all see the insides of the different buildings that they could potentially be in at any time. So one of the things that we've done here in San Juan County is our schools all have handheld radios in them. And this was huge for that day. This is one of the things that really helped save lives, because so Emery Hill on the right was the custodian, and he had his handheld with him. He was able to call the secretary. When he called the secretary, all of the teachers heard his transmission go over their radios, so they knew it was serious. Before the secretary ever went across the speakers and said, lock everything down, they knew what was going on. This allowed for quick and efficient information to get out, and the efficiency in getting everything locked down to save the students. Ben McGahey is in the middle, and he's a retired Farmington police officer. He's responsible for getting the schools in our the radios in our schools. And he has, since this, they're working on one of our larger school districts, which has the majority of their schools on the Navajo Nation reservation, and he's been working with them to get the radios into those schools as well. We train with them. They actually, Aztec does a monthly radio test on with their radios, and we're actually part of that test. So they have an emergency tone that goes out, and then they start and they make sure that everybody on their list has heard, and we all have to reply back. So some of the things, going back to the lessons that we learned from that day, is, again, dispatch has to be in control of the radio. I was always trained that's our job. And so you have to train like you're going to work. I always told my children, practice like you're going to play. And in dispatch, we need to do the same thing. We have to practice like it's real. We can't ever say, this is never going to happen. So whenever we're training, you have to take it serious, and you have to hit every aspect of it as to what's going to happen that day. Pre-plan, know what's going to happen, know what you're going to do, know what your expectations are of your staff. Our expectations were that we had the next shift come in, and they did. They knew up front what we expected, and they were prepared to come in and take over whatever we needed to. Communication, and we all laugh in dispatch because we're communication professionals. We don't always communicate great within ourselves, within our own staff. So that's huge. Communicating what your expectations are, how it's going to happen, and making sure that everybody's on the same page and understands the plan is extremely important. This helps in communicating with your field units. We had an incident during this that happened. We were trying to figure out where we were going to put our students to reunify them with parents. And in that point, you have to find a location big enough, and communicating all of that, especially when we ended up moving them across the county, is important. And that started kind of here in the center when the parents were calling in, because we start asking, where do we want to go? And so then we all have to start making a plan as to where the best location is. Additional staffing, we're about a medium-sized communication center, and additional staffing is often hard to get in, but on incidents like this, they come in and are just prepared to work. And our swing shift, I think, worked a 14-hour day, which is unheard of in our center. I know it's not in a lot of them, but for us, we don't like to go over 12. Post-incident stress. This is becoming huge in our industry, as we find that dispatchers do suffer from PTSD a little bit. So this is something that we've had to really watch with our dispatch staff that was here. We had one dispatcher who felt that she hadn't done the best of her ability that day. And so we talked with her, we got her help, and it actually took us sitting down and letting her listen to her calls and her dispatch from beginning to end for her to realize that she had done everything correctly and hadn't made any mistakes. And, you know, mental health is such a huge issue. So I just recommend keep an eye on your employees. Again, refer them to counseling if they need it, but just keep an eye on them and make sure that they're okay. All right, next slide. Moving forward, what are we doing now? So we have a safe school meeting once a month, and in that safe school meeting is superintendents, some of the faculty from the schools, police officers, fire, EMS, and they've included dispatch since the incident. And in that, we discuss where we need to go forward, what we need to do, and how we need to protect our students in the future. They're pretty forward-thinking. It's a forward-thinking group, and they're always looking for opportunities to help the students and help the schools with safety, mental health, whatever it is that we need help with. One of the things that came out of our safe school meetings is a reunification guide, and the Aztec schools are actually leading the way with this for our local area. And the guide is going to be amazing once they get it done, but it has everybody's roles. It has what the facility will look like whenever it's set up for reunification. And it can be used for any reunification. It doesn't have to be an active shooter. They're thinking about other incidents. We're a high desert area. We don't have a lot of rain, but when we do, we get flooding. We get flash flooding. So what if we had a flash flooding take out a school? We would still need to reunify. It's still a big incident, and so they're trying to make it fluid enough to cover any incident that we might have, not just for shootings. We're still doing a lot of tabletops. Our tabletops have focused more on reunification. This summer, they actually did a drill, and we went out to the primary location that has been identified for reunification and took superintendents and staff through it and explained to them how everything will work. We had a lot of meetings with the public. When incidents like these happen, the public wants to know why. They want to know what you're doing to help, what you're doing to prevent it in the future. And these are all things that dispatch participated in. And this was, depending on which level we were at, it was the director or myself that participated in it. So the big thing that we learned, probably the biggest, is reunification. And we've laughed a little bit about this to ourselves, not real public, but we train, and we train intensively, and we train well, and we get done with our training, and we say, oh, boom, the students are reunified, parents are happy, students are happy, everybody's great. That's not how it happens. So the question then becomes, what do you do with the students? How do you reunify them? So where is the big question? And the reason that the where is such a big part of reunification, Aztec High School has 900 students. In a perfect world, that's 1,800 parents. In our world that we live in, that's probably closer to 3,600. And then you start adding in grandparents, aunts, uncles, friends. The city of Aztec didn't have anywhere large enough to facilitate that many people. So we had to start thinking outside of the box that day very quickly about where were we going to do this. We had the SWAT commander for Farmington PD was headed over to Aztec, and he talks about how in his mind he's SWAT thinking. He's, positions and tactics, and we're going to do this and that. And they called him and they said, we need you to go do reunification. And he said it was like slow motion. He said everything just stopped because everything he was thinking was fast, and all of a sudden he's like, I've never done this. What do we do? How do we do it? And so he made a phone call to a Farmington battalion chief, and he said, can you come help me? I've never done this. I don't even know where to begin. And so they met out at the designated location, and the two of them together with the staff at the location, which was a county facility, began trying to figure out how to put a large room together to facilitate a reunification. They knew enough about reunification to know that you couldn't just put the kids in a room and let the parents have a free-for-all. They had to be checked out through the school, and the school is ultimately responsible for the students, but in an incident like this, the school can't do it on their own. They have to have help. So they put it they did a large building. They divided it in half. They put the students on one side, then they built lines on the other side to start checking them out. They put the parents in a completely different building at this facility, and they would have them fill out a form, and they only allow one parent to go pick up the student. So one parent can go across and get the student, the rest wait outside, and as they come out, then they can reunite there. But that's how they keep it down to a minimum of who and how many are going into these areas. They tried to make the students do this by grade level in alphabetical order, so they were going to do 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th. But the students didn't really cooperate. They just got into alphabetical order. So they ended up with just any one of the 4 grade levels in that line, and that's how they let them go. The other thing they found is that the students were not in quite as much shock as the parents that day. The parents just wanted their students. The students just wanted each other. They wanted to talk to their friends and make sure their friends were okay and make sure it wasn't their friends that were injured or that had gotten killed. So they were more interested in that. The other things to think about in reunification are you're going to have to feed the students. How do you feed them? What do you get for them? And so those are just things, because they were in that building. This started at 8. They were over there about 2, and they hadn't had any food. They hadn't had any food, no water, anything all day. So they had to get food and water and stuff over to the building to get them taken care of as well. In reunification, one of the things that we have talked about in our end is media. What are you going to do with the media? Because media is there, and there's nothing you can do. They're going to be there. They're going to be in your area. They want to talk to the students. They want to talk to the parents. We happen to have a facility that is large enough that we've designated a specific location about half a mile away from the actual reunification location that we can set media up. They can go to this location, they can set up, and then as the students and parents are reunited, we can tell the parents, if you want to stop and talk to media, they're here. But that will keep the media from, as they walk out, just being able to grab them and stick a microphone in their face and ask questions. Safety and security, you're moving your students and your parents are going to be there. You still have to keep in mind of what has happened, and you still have to think about that and how do you keep them safe. We actually had game and fish and BLM officers and livestock officers, and that's who we sent over to our location to do security, because all of our other officers that were on patrol or who had came out to help were at the school still doing security. But you still have to secure the area where you have all your students. Transportation was huge. We had to get school buses. That takes time because your school bus drivers are usually in the morning, then they go do whatever they need to do with their personal lives, then they come back and take the kids home. So the school had to call in the bus drivers. They came over and picked up the students. And like I said, we transported them across our county, probably 10 to 12 miles from the school to do the reunification. Reunification, as far as dispatch, how we're involved in it, we answered 330 phone calls in about an hour and a half, and it was all parents. And they want to know where, when, how, and they want to know now. And you have irate parents, which is expected, and you have to be able to answer their questions, because otherwise they get really, really upset whenever you can't give them those answers. PIOs, public information officers, we discovered in our incident, we had them in here with us in our tactical operations, and then they left to go over to the county admin building because our governor came in and was bringing in her PIO. And what we found in that was that the information that we wanted out wasn't getting out to who it needed to get to. And if you don't give out information, the media is going to grab information wherever they can, or other agencies are going to put out information. And we actually had a local, not involved agency put out a press release saying that there was 12 to 14 injured and they didn't know how many were dead, and that was all incorrect information. And it was because our PIOs were trying to get information out, but they were having to wait for the governor and her PIO, and so it caused some issues. So we have found that going forward, we're not going to allow that to happen. Our PIOs are going to have to put out information so that correct information is going out. Social media was huge in this incident. Our dispatch center received one phone call from the school. One phone call. 900 students, and we got one phone call. The students were on Facebook. The students were on Instagram. The students were on Snapchat, but they were not calling 911. So that was the only phone call we got, was from the secretary. We got 2 phone calls from parents who were on the other phone with their student and were calling from a different line into us, but they weren't there and they couldn't really get a lot of information because the students had locked in. But from the school, we didn't get anything else. The rest of our phone calls were all parents wanting to know what was going on. Was it true? Did they need to come down with their guns? And yes, that's true. We had parents telling us, well, if they're armed and shooting, I'm bringing my gun down and I'm going to shoot too. And it's like, you have to be able to tell the parents, no, do not come down here. You're not going to be allowed near. There's armed officers. Stay away. And so those are things to make sure and teach your dispatchers, is how to address parents when they're dealing with their worst nightmare. Because you have to be firm with them, but you also have to be empathetic so that you can get your point across without causing more fear than what was necessary. We ended up that day with 2 students dead, and we have identified those students as heroes because they lost their lives, but in the losing of their lives, they prevented the other students from losing theirs. We could have had such a worse incident than we did had it not been for our pre-training, pre-planning, being prepared. And so that's my message today to everybody, is train like it's real, pre-plan, be prepared, and don't ever say it won't happen here. Don't ever say that, because it will, and it can. And you don't want it to, but if it's going to happen, you need to be as prepared as you can be to handle the situation.
Wow. Thank you, Tandra. That is an incredible story. Goodness. I have more than a couple of questions for you, and we will get to those here in just a minute. Before we get to that, I just wanted to take a moment to let everyone know to join us next month, October 2nd, same back time, same back channel, for our next episode of our public safety webinars. This one will be 911 Public Education, the Big Picture, presented by Patty Davis, President and Conference Chair of the National Public Educators Forum. So if you are trying to do public education in addition to all of your other duties, this will be a great session for you. So now let's get to the questions. Let's get to all the questions that I had, and if anybody else has any questions, throw them in there in the Q&A, and we'll try to get them answered. So So the first question I had is, so what became of the investigation that was done on the suspect before the school shooting? I know you said that they closed it, but did they just determine that this was a false report, or did they just not come up with enough to be able to do anything about him before this happened? Tell me what happened with that.
They did. They investigated him. They talked to family and friends, and they determined that it was not a credible threat, that he really didn't intend to do anything. He had been a student at the high school, and my understanding is he dropped out, and they didn't believe it was a credible threat at the time. So they closed it and moved on.
So did they determine anything after that, that maybe there was something that they should have looked at a little more carefully in this instance? I mean,
they're still investigating that. They're still looking into him and a lot of his activities, but they didn't find anything that would have indicated at any point that he was going to do this. They did find a list he had a list that said, I'm going into the school, I'm going to shoot people, I'm going to die. But he didn't, previous to that, there was not any other indicators that he would actually do anything like this.
Wow.
So they thought it was all just part of the game, that he had gotten too involved in the game, and there was not any other indicators that he would actually go through with anything.
Okay. And then do you have documentation for the trainings that you did with the schools that others would be able to use as a resource?
I can look into that and see. Our emergency manager actually maintains all of that, all of our scenarios and the questions and all that. I could probably get a hold of some of it. We don't have anything actually really written out. We just go train, and they pick a scenario, and we base our training off of that scenario and how we would all participate in that scenario, up to and including our tactical dispatch team and how they would participate on scene with them.
Okay. And then and so I have written here, evacuation was not pre-planned, and I guess more what I was talking about was the evacuation and I guess where you were going to take people. Had that just not been something that was thought about beforehand, where you would take everybody?
No, we hadn't. In all of our tabletops and our drills, we would go through everything, and then it was like, okay, the students are released, they're happy, back to parents, and we thought about it a little, but it was always the school's responsibility. And so when it actually happened, we were faced with, yes, it's the school's responsibility to reunify the kids with the parents, but your teachers are traumatized, your school administrators are traumatized, and they need help. They can't do that on their own because it takes so much. And like I said, this is a 900-student school, so it's one of our smaller ones in our county. We actually have a couple of them that run close to 2,000, and we had never went to what happens when we have to reunify. We had to find a location large enough for the students, their parents, and like I said, they had grandparents, aunts, uncles, brothers, sisters, everybody showed up. So we probably had 5,000 parents. And where do you put that many cars? You have to have a place big enough to just handle that amount of traffic to begin with. And we only have a couple of places that will even hold that many people. And so we started looking, and that was a really hard sell for the superintendent, because he wanted to keep them here in Aztec. He wanted everything to happen here in Aztec so that the parents didn't have to drive far. And it took some convincing on the incident commander's part to get him to agree to take them the 10 to 12 miles across the county to a much better location where we could secure it and we knew what was going on. You can't use, a lot of people say, well, you had them in the gym, use the gym. but your school is a crime scene. And so you can't just have people driving through your crime scene now. And this actually took participation on dispatch, and we actually are part of the reunification team as far as going back out now. If we had another incident where we needed to reunify, we go out with the team and help in the reunification process, just so that you have people, number one, your school is all directly involved, and that way you're there if they need you to do something, or if they just need someone to support them who wasn't at the school when it happened. So we're trying to look at every aspect of it. So we did identify 2 locations now in our county that we can use if we have to evacuate, because the one facility is often occupied by different events out there. So we've identified now how it would happen and where they would go and what would happen. And that includes we have some schools that are 2 hours away, and they have identified they would bring their students all the way into these 2 facilities to evacuate them and to reunify them with parents.
Wow, it's amazing the things you don't think of when you're working on this.
No, we talked about, we have a junior high here in Aztec, and that's where the Aztec High School football team, their football field is at the junior high because there's nowhere to put it at the high school. And we've talked about the junior high, and they're like, well, we'll just evacuate the students onto the football field. And, of course, being police and active shooter minded, we're like, okay, well, if the shooter's working with someone else, what if they're sitting up on top of the hill where they can see down into the stadium? You've just exposed all your students to more shooters potentially. So those are things that the schools didn't think of, and so those are always things that you have to think about in reunification. Is it has to be a pretty secure facility.
True. And so then when the schools had to call in all the bus drivers, did they have a mass notification system themselves to be able to notify the bus drivers?
They do have a system. I don't know what the school uses. They do have a system that sends out texts and phone calls to call their people back in. That is something we have actually also added to our step here, because one of the things that we discovered in all of this, and I don't know how many of you have ever had this happen, when Aztec had their shooting, they told us, the officers were like, call all the schools in the area and lock them down. They didn't want any of our schools, and we're in a 5,500 square mile, not square mile, 5,500, anyway, we're in a large county. And to notify that many schools, we were running into a lot of problems with phone trees. And phone trees are a dispatch nightmare because we could never get to a live person at most of these schools. We could get to recordings for this person or that person. So we came in, and our schools send us a list, and we use Everbridge as our mass notification, and we actually go into the employee side of it and built lists for the schools with their security or their principal, their assistant principal. We asked them for like 3 names that we could send a text to using Everbridge, telling them, lock your schools down, and then we don't have to make phone call after phone call. It's one text, everybody's notified, we're good.
Yeah, that's actually the best. That's what I was wondering, if there was some, poor secretary who was shaking trying to call all these people in. So
yeah.
That's a good idea.
No, they actually have a system to call people back in for that day.
Oh, that's good. That's a good idea on their part.
Yep.
And you said that you only had actually the one phone call itself from the school.
Correct.
Okay.
Just one.
We
were expecting, who knew, 50 to 100 or more, and we got one from the school.
Wow. And so the calls that you were taking were all from the parents, wanting to know what's going on, where do I go, that kind of thing. So have y'all done any training at any of the PTA meetings with the parents since then to tell them this is how things work. Don't call 911 because we will give you information as we have it?
We have had several meetings with them. We've met with the public, with the schools, and the schools are disseminating a lot of our requests. They don't like the students to use their phones because they want the students to stay quiet inside the room so that a shooter can't determine where in the room they are. We were very fortunate because our shooter was not the sharpest, so to say. He was shooting up where they had all the students down, and I mean, thank God he did because he missed them. But yeah, we've made that known that we need more than one phone call because getting us to the shooter, getting a description of him, would have been easier for us.
And then, have you solved the problem of the officers not being able to get into the lockdown building?
We did. That was the first thing that they fixed. That came out of all the after action reviews was we couldn't get in the building. We had to shoot a window, and they have since then. They all have the magnetic or the key card access, and the officers have key card access into all of our schools now. So even when they're locked down, the officers can go and get in. They have a override. Okay. But that was something that nobody had ever thought about. It was lock your schools down, protect your kids, and we did, and we couldn't get in. Wow.
Another thing that just happens and that nobody thinks about. So what was the biggest hurdle that you didn't anticipate in the dispatch center?
Oh. Probably, as far as our dispatchers, they did everything they were supposed to do. They handled themselves. They did what was necessary. They didn't take breaks. It was 2 hours in, 2.5 hours in before any of them were able to get off of a channel. One of the biggest things from my perspective is, and we all know our dispatchers, they don't like when administrators or people walk up behind them and are watching them do things. And we kind of solved this one with me being on the dispatch floor answering calls. Our director, he stayed right in front of me. He didn't come to the dispatch floor. It's like, nope, you stay here. I'll answer all your questions. So the ability to have one person on the dispatch floor for your administrators to talk to and get their questions answered without having to go talk to your dispatchers or stand behind them so they can stay focused and not worry about somebody behind them was huge. That was, to me, was a big one. As far as the actual job itself, our dispatchers were amazing that day. They just did what needed to be done. They didn't, the radios were a little bit of a hurdle just because, like I said earlier, we had Aztec inside the school searching for the shooter or any other shooters. And whenever our other officers got on scene and were doing the perimeter, we had them on a different radio channel, and we had a couple of them go, well, we're going to go in, and they did. And what ended up, they could have been shot because the Aztec officers didn't know they were coming in. So that was where our lesson learned was we're in charge of the radio, and we have to get back in charge of it. We should have told the officers, negative, you can't go in, go to this channel, let us get communication with those officers. And so that's where our biggest lesson came was we have to be in charge of the radio. We know what's going on both channels. The officers don't. And so we have kind of a bigger picture than what the officers do, so it's up to us to make sure that they don't put themselves in danger by walking into officers that are doing a building search that don't know they're coming in.
Wow. And so you've, since then, I guess you've come up with a radio policy for things like this.
We've been working on it.
Plan.
Yeah, we have been working on that, and the other thing that ended up happening, because we have a lot of TAC channels and we have a lot of side channels, and the Sheriff's Office channel, which is their primary channel, ended up all day long with this incident, and we should have probably moved it off of that channel to a secondary after, about 10:30 whenever we switched our shifts, and the scene they knew they had 2 down with students. They knew the shooter was down. At that point, we could have moved them to a different channel and kept our primary open for everyday traffic that continued. So those are all in our plans for the future as far as our radio use and how we are going to control the radios and ensure that we're giving all of our citizens the best service, even though we have a major incident going.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure I speak for everybody when I say that we certainly hope that you don't ever have to go through this again. But like you said, you will have other incidents. You will have other incidents that'll come up, like your flash flooding and things like that, and you will be so prepared for that just from going through this. So, well, that is all the questions that we have. I really, really want to thank you for your time for doing this. This was an incredible session. I hope this was informative to everybody. It's important to us at Commercial Electronics that everybody has access to training, regardless of the size of their budget. So we will be presenting a different public safety topic each month, and we'll be sending registration information as well as posting it on our website. And remember, if you need the information on today's lesson for CEUs, send an email to info@comelectronics.com. Thank you for joining us. This presentation has been made possible by Commercial Electronics, provider of public safety solutions, including Higher Ground, 911 recording, CQIP third-party quality assurance program, and Carbine 911 next generation call handling platform. Thank you, Tandra, and everybody have a great day.
Thank you.